Welcome to this month's edition of On the Agenda of the European Liberal Forum. I welcome you to this new format of On the Agenda, one of the many experiments that we try to run here to deliver new policy content, new discussion, and discussion formats to you, our distinguished followers, listeners, and viewers. Today we want to talk about a recap of the French presidency. Where did it lead us? Where is it going now with the Czech presidency, and what were the successes and pitfalls, especially looking at the French national elections that happened just recently. Not only the national election, but also the presidential elections in France were shaping the agenda of the last month. And to put it without a lot of sugarcoating, the French government has taken a couple of dents, especially with the strong position of the nationalists and the socialists. Looking at France's position in Europe, the presidency and general attitudes towards Europe, our friends from the Friedrich Naumann Foundation have come up with a study titled Vive l'Europe, French European Policymaking under Emmanuel Macron. This study is the basis for today's discussion, where we'll be discussing France's position towards Europe, what has changed, how the presidency has shaped Europe in the last 6 months. But also we will be discussing the new initiatives about migration, about integration in Europe, how to deal with the security challenges with Russia in the attack of Ukraine, the energy crisis, all topics that are relevant for the new Czech presidency in the transition period from the French presidency. I wish you and I wish us, with this new format, but also with this fresh discussion, a very insightful debate and a lot of insights, not only about France's position in Europe, but also what the next 6 months with the Czech presidency might bring.
Well, dear friends, welcome to another On the Agenda webinar organized by the European Liberal Forum, the official think tank of ALDE Party and the Renew Europe group in the European Parliament. My name is Dr. Antonios Nestoras. I'm the head of policy and research at the European Liberal Forum, and I will be your moderator for this event. This time we are discussing the change of baton in the Council presidency. Europe has this peculiar rotation presidency in the Council, which every 6 months creates a lot of dynamics, a lot of discussions and debates about where Europe is going with the new presidency. Every presidency has its own priorities and so on. So now that the baton has changed from the French to the Czech presidency, I think there would be no better time to take stock of what happened during the past 6 months. Under Emmanuel Macron and the French presidency. And for that reason, we have here today 3 distinguished guests to discuss not only what is happening in France or what has happened in Europe because of France, but also to present a very timely study by the Friedrich Naumann Foundation on which is called Vive l'Europe, French European Policymaking under Emmanuel Macron. And of course, we have the authors of the study here with us. We have Jeanette Zus, European Affairs Manager at the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, and also the person who is responsible for France. We have Eric Pestel, Secretary General of the Association for a European Renaissance, Paris. And last but not least, we have Jean-Christophe Oitjen, member of the European Parliament for FDP and the Renew Europe group. I'll go straight to the authors, and I will give them time to present briefly the study. Jeanette, first we come to you. The floor is yours, and then we can pass to Eric.
Thank you very much, Antonius, and thanks again for inviting us here in the European Liberal Forum. We already had the chance to present the study several weeks ago with ALDE, and now I'm very happy to update that a bit in the context of the French Council Presidency. So I think it's a very timely moment, to catch up a bit and to put it into context. Let me just maybe explain a bit what the logic of the study and the overall conception was. We wrote it initially in just before the presidential election, so it dates back to April more or less. So we only covered the first half of the French Council Presidency by default. So I'm very happy to, as I just said, update the insights that are given in the study now with you in the discussion also.
Well, that's the nature of research; it needs to be updated.
Exactly, it's an incremental process.
Very
that's
quickly.
for sure. So you always have publications and then outdated, but I hope this one is not, because what we did with the study is that we not only covered the French Council Presidency, but we really realized the French European policymaking in the last 5 years under Macron, as the title suggests. So what we did with the study is that we give really like an overview of the major achievements, but also, I don't know if you can't say failures, but what is still lacking, let's say, when it comes to the overall French European policymaking under Macron. Of course, Macron is not alone, but he was a major actor in this. In the first part of the study, we really give an overview. We take stock of different policy fields, what has been achieved and what has been dragged along, not only because of France, but maybe also because of other member states. So we really also analyze the dynamics, power dynamics that have been going on here. Then we analyzed Macron's method, like the way he tried to shape European policymaking in the last years, his moments of hesitation, his way of approaching the European people, the political actors. He's generally perceived as a visionary, very bold person that always comes up with very drastic policy suggestions, which sometimes did disturb somewhat some of the member states, that's for sure. He then also adapted the style a bit, so I think that's very interesting to have a look at. And now I think when we look at the challenges ahead, it's also the question whether he will whether he will be able to adapt himself again, as he announced that he wants to deploy a new method, so to say. And what we also did, is then have a look at the French Council Presidency, of course, which might nourish the debate later on. Let me just maybe recall that when we have a look at what he announced in Sorbonne and at the different policy fields that we analyze in the study, we can say that he was definitely most successful when it comes to the overall area of defense policy. It's a bit more ambivalent, I would say, when it comes to foreign policy, because he was also very often or regularly accused of having led foreign policy in a very unilateral way, without necessarily agreeing upon policy fields or concrete decisions with his European partners. But he was definitely very successful in that. Eric will detail that out a bit in a moment. And he was definitely also quite successful in shaping the overall EU narrative with regard to the question of democratic resilience, the Conference on the Future of Europe. But I'm sure we will talk about that later as well. And I mean, I'm sitting here next to the expert, but I think the migration file, he also succeeded in doing some considerable improvements, although it is far from finalized, this policy file. He was definitely less successful when it comes to his vision in economic and financial policy. For example, take the example of the Eurozone budget. He didn't succeed in imposing his very French vision, I would say. And I already said that the ambivalent performance on foreign policy, on his foreign policy track record, and also the social policy at the European level, very ambivalent track record here. So yeah, I think what will also become interesting more and more now in the upcoming months and years is also how the domestic situation will translate back to his capacity of being credible and of being efficient at the European level. As you know, with the elections that just took place in June, he is definitely weakened at the domestic level. Although we also have to say that, of course, the prerogative in foreign policy and European policy is still to the French president, so he still has this prerogative. But we will have to see how he can reconcile the problems, the inner problems at the national level. So I think with all that, I hope I gave a first overview, but I would also like to hand over to Eric to detail out a bit some more of the insights from the study.
Well, if you ended on the domestic note, then Eric, we couldn't have a better person to explain what is going on in Paris. But we will get there later. But please, Eric, also give us your side of.
Sometimes being in the country, you're not the best getting to have an opinion or judgment, but I will try to, and it will be added by Jan Christoph. But yes, in this study, it's an analysis of the policymaking, of European policymaking by Emmanuel Macron. So from the beginning of his mandate in 2017 to this year, 2022, and as you know, is beginning a new one. And so the French presidency, it was a kind of conclusion of the first mandate, because actually the point with Emmanuel Macron is that, I would say, contrary to his predecessors, is that he wanted to be very clear about what he wanted to propose to French citizens, and I would say more widely to the European citizen about Europe, to have what he called in his speech on September 2017, the Initiative for Europe, which is actually also called and more famous under the name of a speech at the Sorbonne University. And it was a kind of roadmap he proposed to the other member states in order to achieve some really progress in the European Union, building the new structure of the European Union, and on a more concrete way, because as Janet said, he has a vision, and the vision was a kind of a global package for Europe. But actually the point and what makes the difference with predecessors that he spread it into very concrete proposals. For example, one key concept of his vision, which is actually not his own, but it's more or less the vision of the French leaders and presidents before, was a kind of what we call the sovereignty or the strategic autonomy. And actually the point is that he wanted to make it more precise and spread into 6 fields, including defense and security, industrialization, of course finance matters, but also digital and environmental transition. And that's why the roadmap come. And 2 years later, the new parliament has been elected, and also the new commission. And actually, as we know, there were a kind of I would say agreement, or actually harmonization of point of view with Ursula von der Leyen and the Commission, and what Emmanuel Macron has proposed before. And that's why most of the proposal of the Commission, naturally 2 years later, came to an end, or actually to be decided during the French presidency. So actually the timing was perfect for him. And another point we tried to analyze in the research paper is actually that also beyond the concept, there are also a strategy and a method, and the method there's different points, but I would like to today just to focus on one point, is that he tried to make some correlation on several topics. First, as any French president, he tried to boost again the tandem or the cooperation with the German Chancellor, so Angela Merkel. As we know, he didn't succeed as he wanted. And so he tried to have also over coalition with other countries. But the point, perhaps the difference with other presidents, is that actually begin from the first day of his mandate, because he was elected in May, and as soon as July and August, he went to Eastern country, to Vienna, to Sofia, to Bucharest, in order to negotiate some point already. So he has always wanted to include other countries in the negotiation, but I think that's the point of the method. And so about the French presidency, and if we refer to the discourse of Sorbonne, we can say that we have the social part with actually the salary, the minimum salary or wages per country, of course, the environmental progress, the digital with the DMA and DSA, and also about the defense field and domain is actually the compass, the strategic compass, in order to harmonize the different position of the countries about the risk from outside and broader. And actually that was a good timing, knowing that 1 month later there was an outbreak of the war in Ukraine.
So if I get it correctly, the study is a wider study of French influence on European affairs, which started several years ago and culminated with the French presidency, which was very ambitious, as you said. So I'll turn to Jean-Christophe. Jeanette and Eric have talked about the vision, like a grand vision of French policymaking under Emmanuel Macron, and a very ambitious French presidency with priorities and so on. How was this perceived by the European policymakers and elected officials? From your position inside the parliament, did France overplay its hand? Was it then successful or not so much successful, ambivalent, as Annette said? What's the feeling inside the parliament?
Well, from my point of view, we have a unique situation where we had, on the one hand, a strong ambition of President Macron, but of the whole government. All of them are very pro-European. All of them define for the different policy areas their aims. So there was a strong ambition on the one hand, but the strong ambition does not lead to good results automatically. They had, on the other hand, a very powerful permanent representation who did a very good job. And this is not linked to politicians, or not so much linked to politicians, but the French presidency, all the officials that worked here in Brussels aiming to achieve results, they did a very good job. So they managed to get out the compromises. They managed to bring together the different member states. It's a question of mindset, saying, okay, I need to compromise. I need to ally others, which is not so French normally. But they managed to do this, and so they did a very, very good job, because it's a question of going into the details, going into the machine room of the European Union, finding compromises on and breaking deals on important policy areas. And they managed to do so for quite a number of important topics during the negotiations with the Parliament, the famous trilogues, where you have the Council position on the one hand and the Parliament's position on the other hand. They managed to do so, for example, for DMA and DSA, so the regulation of the digital markets and the digital services, one of the big topics that have been discussed in French politics. He delivered on that. So the French presidency delivered on that, and at the end, President Macron delivered on that. So this was a huge step forward. On other issues, this was not about negotiating with the Parliament, but about negotiating with other member states. And they managed to find compromises between the member states on issues where I did not expect that. So from my point of view, they over-fulfilled the expectations from the European Parliament on the question on where do the Council members or the member states manage to find compromises, because the Council as it itself is seen from the Parliament's perspective as the less quicker part of the machine, and we sometimes we're wondering, well, when will the Council finally move? But the French managed to bring movement to the Council, so this is very good. This is not yet policy, because if the member states agree, this is not yet a decision, because there are two legislators on the European level, and we will have to discuss a lot of those issues. Migration is one of them, where they managed to find a compromise inside the member states, but this is not a compromise with the European Parliament, with the policymakers in the European Parliament. So we are far away from such a compromise. And on other policy areas, it's a little bit the same, but they were a very proactive, a very successful presidency. So overall, everybody's really happy with what has been achieved during this presidency.
So the original ambition was crucial in creating momentum in order to reach the compromises, at least. Which, I'll put a difficult question to Jeanette now. Speaking about compromises, which Jean-Christophe presented as an advantage, and we know that it is when we talk about policymaking on the EU level. Was the Conference on the Future of Europe a compromise in the end?
A compromise between
all the players in the ecosystem.
Because, I mean, as you know, and I guess most of our spectators know also that it took us even 1 year to just only get to the governance architecture of this whole democratic exercise, if I can call it like that. So it was definitely a compromise because it took so long. So I don't know if it's the best example of the multi-level governance of the European Union, because as you rightly put it, there were so many actors involved. So it was a bit cumbersome to get there, but I think it was definitely one of the major achievements by Macron to really push this through. However, I'm a bit more, I would be a bit more reluctant to be overly positive when it comes to the final results now, because I mean, we have these 49 recommendations. We have these more around 300 very concrete measures that were nicely put in this very nice report, so that's great. But now it is really up to the member states, to the council at the end, because I mean the parliament already showed a willingness to go further and proposed to go to activate the Article 48 procedure to really go for a modification of the treaties. But in the council, in the last decisions that were taken at the end of June, they only briefly mentioned the Conference on the Future of Europe, but they didn't really commit to any type of treaty change or a more concrete procedure that will that will now be put in place. I mean, I think we have to, everyone is maybe also tired and just want to go on vacation, it's summertime, even here in Brussels. So maybe we have to wait until the State of the Union by Ursula von der Leyen, because that's what has been announced, that she might really take up some of the policy proposals, again, very concrete policy proposals in a myriad of policy fields that anyway are more or less in line with the overall working program of the European Commission. But still, I would have expected a bit more by Macron at the end when it came to negotiating the points that were really like written down in the conclusion of the final European Council meeting in June. So I was a bit disappointed, but maybe he also had to face reality with the domestic situation back home on the one hand, and on the other hand, of course, with the war in Ukraine and the question of enlargement now that completely overshadowed other policy questions. So I think everyone was a bit tired and not saying fed up, but at least tired and absorbed by these other questions. But this shouldn't be a reason to forget about all this, because otherwise it's really a lot of means that have been put into this democratic exercise for nothing, and this would really be a shame.
You know what? I tend to agree that the fact that this conference was agreed in the first place and completed under the current circumstances and the extreme circumstances, the war that broke out. It was a diplomatic exercise in its own right, and I mean, to that extent, it can be considered a success. We have to wait and see how the results are going to be followed up by the institutional players. But still, I tend to agree with your view.
I come in on this because for me, this is one of the most crucial discussions we have for the future of Europe, because it's the question of, do we manage to change our system and to modernize it in a way that we can act quicker, that we are more stringent in the way of doing politics. And what happened at the moment is like the council, it was like acknowledging reception. Yeah, we received it, fine. And thanks. Yeah, and I agree with you that we will have to see what the Commission President von der Leyen will say in the State of the Union. But still, at the moment, we have a piece of paper, and then with the State of the Union, we will have some words. But what we need are concrete actions. So we will see if this is translated into real policy making and changing of the treaties, perhaps at the end. But if there are really measures that come out of this this conference, for me this is important because it was a democratic exercise, which was welcomed by everyone. So now we have to put in place in a way the results of this democratic exercise.
I think that actually the Czech has said, the Prime Minister, that they said that they will continue and they will push the results of the conference. So we will see if they act as what they say.
So we are there at the moment where the new priorities, we don't know exactly how they're going to be implemented, how many they are. And maybe we have another X factor that, somewhat derails the priorities of the presidency, because that's exactly what happened with the French presidency as well. We started with a very ambitious plan and vision for the presidency, and very early the plan had to be shifted more on the security side because of the war. Eric, maybe you could tell us your opinion on how the Macron and the French presidency handled the situation, and whether they, at least on this very specific topic, which was an emergency, if they succeeded to influence European policymaking towards Russia and transmit Macron's vision for European foreign policy.
Actually, the paradox is that what Macron written is one of his book, and later he said during the Sorbonne speech that Europe should stop with crisis management and should think on the long term for really thinking about how we change the function, as Jacques-Christophe said, to be more efficient and to react more quicker. And actually, the paradox is that he had to manage crisis with all the leaders of the member states. So first was the COVID crisis, and second, and I would say more critical, the war in Ukraine. So actually, the point is that all these crises came to reinforce this idea of sovereignty, and that Europe should be independent. So the COVID crisis were more on the healthcare and all, medicine and so on, and for the war in Ukraine, it was more about energy, as we said, and now food and alimentary autonomy. So, especially during the Versailles summit at the end of March, he said that actually that would prove, this crisis proves the necessity for Europe to strengthen themselves and strengthen their structure and to react more efficiently. And so that was more positive for him. And moreover, I think also that all the preparation he did with the other member states, with the other leaders, with the parliament, especially with the Renew Europe group, was to really think about this sovereignty, this strategic autonomy. So I think that the mind were ready. And that was a good point, and perhaps that's the explanation also that Europe reacts so quickly, surprisingly to everyone, because actually there were already a preparation on the mindset before, for that actually all the member states and the citizens were actually prepared to this sovereignty and reaction to defend and to protect another European country.
Janet, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, if I just quickly add up on this, I think that's a crucial difference to the German Council presidency, because for Germany there was the COVID crisis that hit, which was completely unprecedented. Of course, it was a complete shock, and Germany had to reshuffle its whole policy agenda. So it really came as a huge surprise, and it didn't help at all. And I think it was the exact opposite of what happened with France. So all the member states had huge expectations when it came to Germany, and it didn't live up to expectations, but also, because there was COVID that hit. And for France, it already proclaimed itself that it would be that it would have a very high level of ambitions, and it really lived up to it. Although there was this crisis, but the difference is that, of course, the war in Ukraine. Well, there couldn't have been a better moment, if you like, which is a bit the paradox of this, of course, awful and painful war. For the whole overall discourse that Eric just described, so this overall narrative of a more sovereign, a more strategic and autonomous Europe. So I sometimes wonder, to be a bit more critical here, what would have happened if there wasn't a war that broke out for the decisions that were taken. Of course, there was initiatives like the strategic compass that have been foreseen for several years now. So this was not in direct correlation with the war. But of course, the European Defence Fund and the mapping exercises and this narrative, this overall narrative was very much shaped by this incident, and I think it kind of helped the overall French perception.
Well, that's a very interesting contrast between the French and the German presidencies, and of course I appreciate the discourse surrounding European strategic autonomy, especially after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But in practice, what I've seen so far is the expansion of NATO with 2 new members as a reaction to the war in the East. But in any case, since we are on the war, another thing that was not in the agenda and no one expected to be a priority before the war was European enlargement, which has been dormant, if I want to be politically correct, dead, if I don't want to be politically correct, for a decade, with many countries just waiting on the corridor, not even in a waiting room, although they had all the criteria to start accession negotiations and so on. So I'll turn to Jan-Christophe and ask whether he sees the enlargement policy being reignited in the near future because of, I mean, to some extent it's already been reignited, but how much, what expectations could we have?
From my point of view, at the moment, we have a political consensus that we proclaimed Ukraine candidate and Moldova, by the way. Sometimes we forget Moldova, but it's an important decision as well. On the other hand, we have states that already have the candidate status, and they're not progressing at all. Some of them, Serbia, for example, it's not progressing at all. It's regressing even. For me, there are 2 very clear points that have been made, by the way, by President Macron, but others as well. First, we have to reorganize ourselves and find a new methods of doing things inside the European Union before any enlargement. Is this nice to the states waiting? No, not at all. And I wish that we speed up this process of reforms inside the European Union in order to be able to accept new member states. But this clearly is something where the member states, some of the member states had a very clear stance on, stating we need reforms inside the European Union, especially on unanimity, before having new members. And the second point is we have criteria. We have the Copenhagen criteria. And if the Copenhagen criteria are not met, a country cannot become a member of the European Union. So for me, this is very clear as well. And there are, the discussions that we have with voters that hear, now you want Ukraine becoming member of the European Union very quickly. I would always say, no, it's a political symbol. It's a sign that we give. And we say to them, you belong to our family. But Ukraine has to change a lot before becoming a member of the European Union, as do other members, as do other states have to change. So I don't see a real new ignition, to be very frank, on those issues. Perhaps there might be slight changes in the way we address those issues, and I would like to have them. But if we don't change our overall way of doing politics in the European Union, I don't think that we are fit for new member states. And I want to say as well that nevertheless there are things that change with member states. I mean, we have the decision on the euro for Croatia, which is an important step as well. I mean, it's not only about new member states; it's as well about deepening our links with states that are already inside the European Union, which was an important one. But on enlargement, this is a difficult topic. But the neighborhood issue as a whole, we did not talk about the Maghreb states and the eastern neighborhood. I think we need a deeper collaboration with those member states without regard to membership.
If I may, I would like also to add a word about the proposal of Emmanuel Macron about European political community, which has been criticized by some of the concerned countries, including Ukraine, because they receive it like it was a way of postponing the real integration. And as Jan Christophe just said, actually the real integration need to meet some criteria. And to be very frank, as you did, as you were, it will take time. And so the proposal was not to be in the waiting room, as you said, but just to already include, and because with the political community, it could be done quickly in the mind of Macron, because it's not to, from the other information I get, it's not to create another structure or another organization, but it's a kind of G7 or G20 on the international level way, but it's just to have the opportunity to the country to meet together and to discuss about common stakes like defense or autonomy or providing, cooperating about the different necessity, and actually it was more to accelerate an inclusion, not integration, but an inclusion, and to make them also participate to this European dialogue, which is very specific, and perhaps these countries are not used to. So it's also to get familiar with European, at least member state spirit.
That's a very clear explanation of the motives behind the proposal. But of course, we have to take into consideration the reality on the ground there. And these countries have been waiting for decades, not only because, it's partly, of course, it takes two to tango. It's partly, of course, their fault for not making the necessary reforms. But on the other hand, here as well, the ambition for enlargement has been very, very low.
Due to France, mostly.
Yes, major factor. Yes, that's why it's interesting to see the dynamics during the French presidency and after the French presidency concerning the enlargement. But the fact is that it's a very sensitive subject for them.
But the question is, there are different steps in this process, and for me, you could, for example. There are countries which made major steps, like North Macedonia, for example, and I think that that you can start even accession talks. So going the next step, because accession talks are not necessarily a membership immediately, and you can use this time of those talks, of these negotiations, of this process, in order to change the way we do politics inside the European Union, in order to make the European Union fit for new member states. The problem is that I don't see the willingness of the member states to do so. I don't see the ambition inside the Council to do so, to do those changes inside the European Union. That's why it will be crucial to see how the outcome of the Conference for the Future of Europe is put into place. And if there's a real willingness and a political ambition to do so.
I was about to say, there is no lack for policy options.
Yeah.
There is a lack of political commitment and will to continue with completing the European project. But because we have 15 minutes left, I think we should go into the domestic politics a little bit. It's going to be interesting and intriguing also for the viewers. So I'll go to Jeanette first. So it was not only the presidency, it was not only dealing with the aftermath of the COVID pandemic, it was not only the war in Ukraine. Macron also had two elections to fight during the presidency. So what happened there? What do you think the implications will be, not only for France, but also for EU policymaking in general?
Well, first of all, let me say that although there were quite some critiques against Macron and this decision to stick to the initial agenda, which was not initially a decision taken by him, but back in the day taken by François Hollande, by the way, to uphold the French presidential elections. Although these critiques, I think overall France performed well. So we can't say that when we go back to the French Council presidency in general, that it was completely impeded or overshadowed by the presidential elections. Of course, at the domestic level, in the media, no one really cared about the French Council presidency. That's for sure. I think this is for sure. But I think even if the Council presidency took place at another time, there wouldn't necessarily have been way more media coverage in France. I think I sometimes felt like the other member states were more concerned than France itself about that. So I think overall France performed well, although there was the elections taking place. On the other hand, maybe Jan-Christophe Oetjen is a bit more entitled to speak about that. I heard that sometimes there were some French MEPs that were not always that present because they were indirectly, there were indirect implications, and they were engaged in the campaign, things like that, supporting their fellows in the National Assembly. Of course, there was a little implication then with the nomination of Chrysaoula.
Zakharopoulou.
I will get there at some point to the French government, but this only came at the very end. So as a first take on that, I think it didn't impede that much. On the other hand, strategically, I still question whether Macron was really that successful in using that as a momentum for its own purposes, because that was the very reason why he didn't change it at the end, because he could have done this. So although it was up to Hollande back in the day to decide on that, he could have changed that after, and he didn't, because he wanted to use that as a political momentum, showing off his capacity of being a statesman, which he's overall knowing best when it comes to the management of the war. I definitely see his performance here. But when it came again to the French Council presidency, and it's the same for the Conference on the Future of Europe, so everything that's really happening at the EU level, he couldn't really seek profit that much out of it at the national level. And I think he won the elections, and we're of course very happy about that. Everyone was really relieved when he got re-elected. But now, as we have seen with the legislative elections, there is really so much disruption and discrepancies, internal discrepancies in French society and politics. So it's not only a question about the political level, but really within French society of different cleavages that are unsolved. And I think we are definitely witnessing a moment of crisis here, of democratic crisis. The Conference of Future of Europe can give some answers also for the national level, how to, because it's been modeled, it's been based on the model of some French experience that were made with the Convention citoyenne and with the French Convention for Climate, Convention citoyenne pour le climat. But still, Macron didn't completely succeed in reconciling the French with the European issue. He, of course, did campaign on European issues, especially because he was facing Marine Le Pen, and he did well, so I'm not criticizing that as such, but he didn't really succeed in overall convincing a majority of French citizens that, to be a bit cheesy here, Europe is the answer, if you like. And I think there's a huge level of poverty in the country. There's, I think, around 9 million people that are in poverty. So it's really considerable efforts that have to be done in the future to really reconcile this huge part of electorate. And this is why we see such a huge and strong opposition on the right, on the extreme right, and on the extreme left, I think.
So you agree that these fragmentation of the French society, which is not a French phenomenon by any means, it's almost everywhere in Europe.
It's extreme. More extreme in France.
It's more extreme there. Yeah. This fragmentation, then this extreme fragmentation, and the growing new cleavages with different social groups has been manifest in the result of the legislative elections in France. And what happens now then? Is it difficult? Is it more difficult to govern France? And what is going to be the implication for the vision of Macron for Europe?
Yes, of course, the situation will be more difficult than if Macron and the Renaissance Party has a majority, a complete full majority, which means that according to the French political system, it's in that case, it's very easy for the president and the government to manage a country since the parliament doesn't challenge very much. We are not in
now we have democracy.
Sorry?
Now we have democracy.
That's what the Germans always say now.
Yeah, so
Consensus culture, yay.
yeah, some of the journalists and analysts say that now he has to manage as a German chancellor, and he has to find coalition. So actually, I would say that nobody could really know what happened, because of course it will be up to Emmanuel Macron, Elisabeth Borne, the Prime Minister, and the government, but it's also up to the other parties, and to see how much they will be prepared to a new mindset, more in compromise, project by project. They proposed at least a coalition, but the party were not ready for that because actually it was not in the program during the elections. It was impossible to have an official coalition afterwards. So for the time being, it will be a coalition by, project by project. Perhaps within 2 years, it could be an official coalition, something's going on. And it's up to the different party to say that. I would say that on the European matters, as we said, in the new government, we went from Borne to Boone, because the new secretary, so used to be Clément Beaune and now is Laurence Boone. And I think that the profile and the experience of Laurence Boone is very interesting. And it's also show perhaps the new, not vision, but the new concept of the European matters in the mind of Macron, that, as we know, Clément Beaune was one of the advisors who helped him to build the vision and the discourse of Sorbonne. And now Laurence Boone is an economist. She was advisor to President Hollande during the Greek crisis, and she was one pushing for, opposing to the Minister Schäuble and Angela Merkel, who wanted to expel Greece, and actually she was the one who gave some selling point to President Hollande to keep Greece in. So she knows the subject, and I think she has been appointed because in the mind of Emmanuel Macron, I think the next challenge for Europe is stability and growth project, and with an inflation context, it will be more about negotiating and having compromise about finance and economy matters.
I see. Jean-Christophe, since you commented, now we have democracy, what question comes next? Franco-German relations.
Well, honestly, they're quite good. And it works well now. That we have a new government in Germany. I would say progressive government with Social Democrats and Greens and Liberals. And with the government of Macron, it works well. It's easier as well as with Angela Merkel, that's for sure. Despite the fact that Scholz takes sometimes the same attitude towards policy areas and problems, and Germany is not so quick in decision making as France is, because in France it's easy. It's
It used to be.
It used to be easy.
It's one king.
It's the king has to decide. No, I'm exaggerating. But you have one decision maker. It's the president, and then it's applied. Now they will have to negotiate in parliament, so this will take more time. As this takes more time in Germany. I mean, this is a normal. For me, it's a normal process. And honestly, I'm a little bit. I'm not happy that Macron lost the majority. I don't want to say this, but I think the members of the parliament, the members of the Assemblée Nationale, they have a new role now to play. They have a new role now to play, which they did not play in the past. In the past, they were kind of it was decided elsewhere, and they applied. Now they will have to negotiate. They will have to be real parliamentarians that are not only messengers for a purpose, but they will have to do policy making, which they did all as well in the past. But it will be very different. They will have a more important role. So I'm happy about this because I'm a parliamentarian, and I think parliamentary democracy is the best way to do laws. And so this will be. That will be interesting. But the tandem, the Franco-German tandem, will work well in the European Union. I'm very sure about this, and especially in those times of crisis. Sometimes Germany need to be pushed in order to be quicker. But the intention that is there is very clear and very pro-European, and it's a very common approach. Let me just say, if I may, a comment on the French elections. For every other country, if your president is the leader of the free world in a moment of war, where you face the enemy, and you have such a leader who is your leader, there would have been a massive choice for this leader. In France, this was not the case. In France, it was not a choice for Macron, it was a choice against the others. And so for me, this was quite astonishing to see that he was not more powerful at the end of those elections. And this brings me to what Jeanette says. The cleavages in the French society are very deep, and what we saw in the for the second round of the legislative elections, that it was kind of the people preferred to abstain instead of voting for the other, shows me how deep those divisions are, because they don't trust each other. None of those polls, none of those groups trusts each other. So if you don't trust, you cannot build coalitions. If you don't trust, you cannot build compromises. So there will be a whole exercise on in the French is needed in the French society on retrusting the others.
I believe abstention in legislative elections in France are traditionally low in any case.
The abstention is traditionally high, you mean?
High, yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
But I wanted to go back to what you said about Germany having a historically slow decision-making process. Now France having, with these difficulties that Macron is facing, a slower decision-making process with more need for coalition building in the parliament. And we know that on the European level, the Commission is not a crisis management institution, and there we will have also slow decision-making process. So this alignment there of slow decision-making processes, how will it affect EU policymaking at a time where we've seen successive crises, one after the other? And I would like to end with this question that you can all three answer, maybe starting with Eric and then finishing with Jan-Christophe.
I would say also that this new situation in France could be an opportunity, I would say, to build a European demos. Because actually, perhaps French people, French citizens, will understand how the other countries think and how they have to build this compromise. And because it was one of the points, perhaps also of the Euroscepticism, is that for the French, they say that they believe in Europe. but they think that Europe is not efficient anymore. Sometimes they sum up it, and we are too many peoples, too many countries. I mean, and it's too heavy, and we have to be more efficient. I think what they think is, as we do in France, according to the political system in France. So if we slow down a little bit the decision making, if we have to compromise, perhaps French citizens will understand that actually it's what happened in the other countries that's happened at the European level. And perhaps we are just tearing a kind of harmonization in Europe. And as we know, in all crises, there are opportunities. And I know for the time being, it's not still a crisis in France, but in the new situation, it could be also that kind of opportunity.
Thank you, Anne.
Yeah, I'm also very curious to see whether there will be some changes when it comes to the political culture in France with regard to consensus making. Not sure, though, if this will really translate back to a better understanding of European dynamics, because whenever I watch TF1, 20h, like the newspaper, the news in the evening, the French one, it's all about French agriculture and things like that. But still, it's definitely a very interesting development, what we're seeing now. I would just like to add on Germany and the bit more slower decision-making process. I don't think that this is particularly slow. What we have been seeing now the last couple of months since the new coalition government is in place, it's rather the opposite. They definitely proved that they are capable of seeking consensus among different policy fields. However, I would be a bit more critical than Jan-Christoph Oetjen when it comes to the track record of European policy making, especially with regard to Olaf Scholz, who is quite reluctant, and I'm still missing kind of an official response to the speech of Sorbonne, what was written down in the coalition government treaty. So we do have a high level of ambition on the theoretical level, but so far we haven't seen that many policy initiatives. On the other hand, okay, we were in a vacuum situation because we had the elections in Germany, and then France was completely absorbed by its own elections. Now it's summer break, but I would really expect the new German government, especially Olaf Scholz, within a Franco-German meetup of all the new ministers, then to really come up with new and fresh ideas, something like a Meseberg agreement, also of course in line with the Treaty of Aachen, to really revamp Franco-German affairs. Although I do agree, of course, that in general the relationship is good and the contacts are established, but I'm still missing a bit the very concrete proposals here.
Thank you, Sam. Yeah, so
I would agree on this, and I think that there are some parts of the Sorbonne speech where we can make real progress. And with the war in Ukraine, where, by the way, the German response was very slow and too slow because of the dependence of Germany on Russian fossil fuels and gas. But concerning defense policies, there was a huge step that has been made in Germany with the agreement in this coalition with the Greens that we lift the spending on defense policies, and the willingness to foster European defense policies. I think this is a very, very crucial moment in the European Union, because we need to. You said earlier, at the moment it's only NATO who become bigger with Finland and Sweden. This is good news. But I think inside the European Union we have to show that we lift up to the expectations as well, and that we do our part in this NATO for the future.
we mean business, as the American would say. Well, thank you very much, all three of you, for this wonderful discussion. there's a lot to watch out for and a lot to expect in the future. I mean, we touched upon a lot of topics. We're waiting for the follow-up on the conference of the future of Europe, new decision-making processes in France, new coalition in Germany, when the war is going to end and what the next day in Ukraine will be, whether the EU enlargement will reignite and so on. But again, thank you very much for this wonderful discussion, and hope to talk to you again soon in the future.
Thank you
Thanks for
very
having
much.
us.
Thank you.